So, okay, let's have a conversation. I really wanna make the connection of the social part, the techno part, and the policy part, and bring in the finance into this because we need resources to make things happen. So if we want to finance peace, resiliency, uh, we need to learn about how where the money, how the money flows, and all of that. And also, this is related to academic institutions. How are you going to finance peace? How are you going to weave peace into the curricula? How can we finance and create new programs? And so this is the kind of the conversation that I want to start. It's it's not easy, especially for the developing world, where the institutions, the universities pretty much depend on the government. Whatever the government hands them down, that's it, right? They have no other resources to go out and raise money. But maybe we can create entrepreneurial programs, global programs, what I call soft landings, where we can help other institutions, let's say from Africa, come to New Mexico. We help them soft land, work with them, and raise also funding so that they can use those resources in their countries. This is what I'm thinking, and I just want to learn from you what your thoughts are.
I mean, I think you've really set the table well, Ramiro, and Joe will weigh in with Dean's perspective and all. Um, from my background, I think there's financial implications to having or losing peace in terms of the risk that's created for investments in that region. And that's not a bold statement. The rating agencies and even the securities regulators internationally are starting to look at elements that, when they fall out of favor or fall out of alignment, create huge risk. We know about climate change. We've seen the pandemic's effects on inequality. We can expect the migration from food insecurity and global conflict. So all of that have an effect on investment activity to support supply chains in country, to use labor and resources, and hopefully give back to the stabilization of those countries. Um, what what has been missing, it seems, and the regulators are starting to call this out, is a more dependable regime for ESG, environmental social governance, assurance that if a fund says it's investing along ESG guidelines, where's the data to do that? And the data, in our many conversations of this group, have been one of the key contributions that the global engineering schools can make to be able to, um, tell, how do you create consistent data? How do you create it in anticipation of the issues that fall out of alignment, that we would call peace? Um, as you all know, I think there's a periodic table of quality of life that can be built to reflect government budgets that are addressing gaps in elements like environment, like education, etc. The SDGs, unfortunately, don't have a financial thesis underneath them. They have an aspirational thesis underneath them. And the difference between financing and aspiration is quite large, and many decades. And as this group has focused more and more on the urgency of climate change and the need to push the clock from 2030 tipping point to 2031, 2035, peace engineering can help us do that as a global set of activities that are totally unique to whichever region or industry, but actually can be financed and recognized by the many funds that are forming to finance ESG and similar impact theses. One final thing: the insurance industry needs to. The insurance industry is not often by many thought to be part of the financial industry, but it really is. And if we give the insurance industry the way to recognize the elements that moderate and modulate risk, they respond by resetting premiums, by offering new coverages, especially for regions that are becoming more and more vulnerable on coastlines, etc. You're going to have to be creative, not just in how you build the concrete, but how you communicate to the insurance industries that they will not that they can afford to make a profit in places that are risky, and because their specialization over the decades and centuries is trading in risk. The more data we give them to do that, the better off they're going to be.
Okay,
So those are
Joe.
just some thoughts.
The in the academic sectors, what we find is that the institutions, and these are U.S. based, but European based follow the same, and the Chinese model is evolving very rapidly to be in line with ours. So some of the major educational degree granting programs in the world have some similarities, and the thing that is most consistent about them is they're risk adverse. They are intentionally glacial in their processes, and the notion is that fads need to be avoided because the educational outcomes are supposed to be lifetime impacting. So there is reason to be glacial, but glaciers do move, and so there's this interesting dance that takes place in academia.
They move, or I've read that they can disappear, Joe.
Well,
just like educational institutions that don't keep up.
Evolution isn't necessary because survival isn't mandatory. We all know that principle from Darwin. But the movement is slow, and but it moves, and I think understanding what allows for movement is kind of important here. And typically, academia looks to outside organizations for guidance. And there's some that are more respected than others, of course. But one in engineering that's very highly respected is the National Academy of Engineering and sort of the national, the research council, NRC, National Research Council. And in what's interesting is there's been considerable interaction beginning in about 2013 between the national academies for Great Britain, China, and the United States. And they've been working together in a series of programs called Global Grand Challenges. And this program was kicked off in London in 2013, and then in Shanghai, and then United States, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I fortunately had a chance to participate in the program really since its beginning. And you see convergence taking place in these organizations around things. And it's, and interestingly, the National Academy of Engineering here in the States released a new strategic plan this year with a highly evolved state of objectives compared to their last strategic plan. The strategic plan for the NAE, there was a plan done in 1998 that was revised in 2015. And then this is the first actual rewrite of the strategic plan for over 20 years. Imagine to face the change in engineering that the plans didn't change for 20 years, but it came out in 2021. And it was largely influenced by this Global Grand Challenge program. And also there's also a very significant membership in the NAE is about 40% industry, about 20% national laboratories, and about 40% academia. So this has a lot of outside of academia influence. And I don't know if you've had a chance to see the four key, only four strategic directions for the National Academy in their new report, but it speaks really closely to peace engineering. And can I share screen real quick, Ramiro, because I put them on a slide. So this is the recently released NAE strategic goals. Increase engineering talent through a strong commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, those are terms that had not appeared in a previous NAE strategic plan. Instill a culture of ethical and environmental responsibility in engineering. Identify and inform the frontiers of engineering theory, practice, and policy. Policy is kind of interesting in there. That's a new word for engineering. Improve capabilities and competencies for complex systems engineering. I don't know of an area of engineering that embraces those four, all four, more than peace engineering. And I think there is an opportunity here, and I don't think it's in 2026. I think it's in 2021 to be able to say to deans, to provosts, and ideally to presidents, that if we want to be, that there is an external body that we respect that is actually identified exactly what we have identified, that this represents an opportunity for our institutions in that it de-risks any investment in a certain sense and allows us to say that we're part of that community that we respect for the National Research Council and kind of these global organizations. It sounds small compared to some of the things that Bruce talks about in terms of global markets and massive investments and those kinds of things. But these are some of the influencers in academia. This is and it's something we need to figure out how to leverage. And I don't think I exactly know how to do that. I have ideas, but the idea that our thoughts just happen to be 100% superimposable on the NAE's new strategic plan without discussion is kind of interesting.
I think it's brilliant that you brought this, up, because when you look at the second and the fourth element there, the second being a culture of responsibility. You've heard me talk about it at Stanford, how I've focused on codes of conduct, and that when I raise them with the students in the engineering school, they're not as aware of a code of conduct on their activities and their responsibility to look at the long-term effect of what they're doing, as I would have thought necessarily. And codes of conduct result in litigation when you forget that you had them. And then on the fourth element of complex systems, that's where we've talked about this in the group, wouldn't it be amazing if the deans of the business school and the engineering school actually had lunch together once a month and talked about how they, from their different perspectives, have a lot in common, or with funders have a lot of joint pitches to make. On the one hand, the dean at the business school says, I want to train people to engineer money to make sure that it achieves a social purpose. On the other, the engineering dean saying, well, I have all this data that seems to leave with our students' laptops after we graduate them with the PhD degree. And what if we captured some of that data so that you in the business school and many places else could see the true fact of the world and make a decision about investing in it and de-risking it. So I love that you've found this, Joe. This is great.
Oh yeah, I was thinking about NAE because I agree with you. Finally, they changed, right? It took a long time to get in sync. And I think, and I'm going to ask you, is this can be the lead, the opening conversation
so.
for the workshop. I think this brings everything together. It ties peace engineering. By the way, it's connected to NAE that everybody respects and everybody's a member. And I think that this would be a great opening talk for the workshop. And I see right there the connection that we were all talking, social techno policy, right? It's there. So I think it's aligned with what we've been doing in our conversation for the past 3 years. This is great.
Well, one of the reasons why this slide exists is I was starting to put together what I thought would be a couple of key slides to open our meeting on the 28th. And I thought this would be a good, right now it's just black and white. I don't have any logos or anything like that. So it's not very good, but I really thought there were 3 things that would be interesting to open with. And I don't have the entire framework, but one of them was this idea that alignment with objectives from outside organizations is something that we don't have to worry about. In fact, we could argue that we're probably more, I think every other area of engineering would wish for the alignment that we have. If I'm speaking out for civil engineering, I'm struggling with this one. Or if I'm speaking out for chemical engineering, I'm struggling with this list. And mechanical engineers with 4% women in their enrollment are really struggling with this list when you start thinking about issues of inclusion and how do we change. So we have this really cool opportunity here to be in alignment, and that eases a lot of anxiety from people in terms of whether or not this is a good idea or not. The second thing that I thought would be really good to talk about is the engineering design process. And because we'll have people from all different backgrounds in this, and that really we can frame peace engineering in the engineering design process in a way that doesn't make people feel like they've completely lost track of their roots, that it just is a bigger community is what we're talking about. And then the third thing I thought we could talk about, just to get the things going before the rest of the conversation takes place, is to say how we do it. And I think this is where people really try to derail me when I talk about peace engineering. They're like, okay, so this sounds good. Okay, you've spun a good yarn here, Hughes, but tell me, how are you going to do it? And this is, if we can deflect that, the how do you do it, and make them say, oh, okay, so you do know how to do it, then I think there's a chance for a really productive discussion the rest of the day. And so the model that I would propose that we use for how do we do it is the Agile Scrum process. Yeah. And just show people that in the Scrum, we can involve a lot of people, including engineers, because I think the engineers feel like they're going to get lost in this. And when we've got the folks from the national labs, they want to make sure that they have a part in this. And just say, let's get away from the waterfall thinking and let's just work in the Scrum process and make a home for everybody. And we'll just create a big backlog of projects and we'll have stuff to work on forever. And I think if we go through those 3 things, I think as I was thinking about the opening, I think that could allow us to have a pretty we could get rid of some roadblocks early and let people think about, okay, then in that way we can all participate in this, and this is an opportunity. Does that make sense, Romero?
Especially,
it's perfect. Go ahead, Bruce. Sorry.
No, especially Joe, if one of your slides was we're at the end of 2021, and here's how the process is going to go till 2023 or 2024. Yeah. So an 18 to 24 month, slide that has the little bullets and what the critical milestones.
That's a great idea.
And you say, I'm going to walk you through this, but we're engineers and we engineer projects to finish on budget and on time, mostly. Scope creep.
Let's just leave it at that.
Scope creep.
Sometimes.
Yeah, let's.
We never heard of runaway projects.
Ramiro, you guys have been really good with your lawyer jokes, so I have to leave you alone. So, but I think that slide, Joe, of the how do we do it, or here's the version 1.0, that would be great.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's what you just that additional slide. There's some real genius there, Bruce, and the I've got next week. I'll show you a draft. How's
Right.
that? I've got something kind of forming in my head. It's evolving rapidly, but
Well,
I'll try to get it on
I
paper.
also wanted to bring Anik put something in the chat that's super powerful. I mean, in terms of convergent forces,
Yeah.
Anik, do you want to speak to what the students have been demanding and coming up with as an alignment?
I can only speak on behalf of last year's WEEF and GEDC conference, but we did have the students at the very end, all of them come together to come up with a list of what they think should be prioritized in engineering education. And some of the biggest themes were what was on that slide, Joe, from the NAE.
Yep, you're right. Do we have that list handy someplace? Can we?
Yes.
I will try to find it.
Well, Anik and Felipe led the group of students last year. Anik, do you still have access to those documents? That'd be awesome to bring them back up.
I do have some, because I don't have access to the drive on which it's on anymore. But I do have the declaration that we wrote.
That would be awesome to help and bring it up in the panel too, because this was a hard work. It was the best student engagement we ever had in any of these WEEF-GEDC, and this was thanks to Anik, Felipe, and some of the students that we worked together. I mean, it was great. So
let me send it to you guys in an email really quickly.
I mean,
okay.
how often is it that the professors and the students and the national associations are on the same page, Ramiro?
I know this is what we have done. I don't know. It just came together, right? And Anik, I'm gonna throw a wrench. Okay, you're starting a PhD program, and you just connected all those 4 bullets in one. It's about the data, right? Data science, complex systems, and finance. And you're starting a PhD program. How can we help? I would love to start a PhD in this area too. And, how can we help? What do you think, how we can help? What kind of tools you think you need? This is, we're breaking rules here.
Well, I first of all haven't gotten into any PhD yet. I'm only having conversations with people right now. And I'm trying to figure out, what Joe just said. Can I not have an answer for that just yet?
Well, you can think about it, but it's coming. It's coming.
Yeah.
Donna, about you? I mean, how do you? This would be a cool thing, a cool PhD. Financing data science, peace data standard, finance.
That, and we have so many collaborators who have the ability to compile and share this data and help analyze it as well.
Well,
So I wanted. Oh, go on.
This relates to the conversation we've had also about bringing in non-traditional people, such as myself, to bring career path networks and ways of thinking and ways of using data into the engineering schools. Because, as the adjunct faculty that we are designated, we don't have much power in these universities. In fact, we have none by design. So, if you want to have a permanent structure of really practical knowledge, you probably will want, in addition to faculty, and student input, you'd really want this adjunct tribe to be um designated as something other than a year-to-year inconvenience. I think you'd want them to know that they have a home and a loyalty with the universities, because that also will raise money for PhDs like the soon-to-be Anik, and make sure that she has her funding through the various corporate and government alumni that would be in that tribe. So, think about an all hands on deck approach to the four areas that the NAE that Joe points out, and you'll find that you have more friends and allies than you thought you did, and invite the deans of the other schools to lunch every once in a while at the engineering school. You can cater it for the alumni. You can probably cater it for your fellow deans.
One thing I'd
So
add to that is, oh, go on.
No,
Joe.
Go
please,
ahead,
no,
Donna.
please, no, no,
Oh,
Donna.
that I'd
Donna.
add to that is going down, going to the community levels. This is something we're doing with the ECHO is bringing peer-to-peer mentoring to communities, especially underserved or rural communities, where people are losing their brain power to larger, to the urban areas, because there is no economic stability in these areas. They're losing people. And so to go to the community level, build capacity there, you may start out by building capacity, teaching how to do solar installations and maintenance. But those people are going to go on, they're going to go on and get, advanced degrees, and they'll bring that economic backbone back into their communities. And that's, I see that also as a role of peace engineering. I mean, if we want to get the whole idea of responsibility about how you're living your life, how you're making money, this is the ethics of peace engineering.
Well said. Yeah. Especially because, as we've talked in the group, the PhDs are going to go out to the same communities, study them under a microscope, consolidate their findings in a thesis, and leave. And the community wonders, what were we, just lab rats in this process? We're here forever. And leave us, grow us with capacity. So, the loyalty to these communities that work with our university courses and the labs and the rest, it's really, we have to caretake that. That's a very special, trusting relationship. And we need to caretake that.
Bruce, I'd comment on that a little bit. I agree with everything you said. So this is not pushing back. This is trying to expand on that as an opportunity. So we focus a lot on the PhDs. I think that the individuals capable of really working in the communities and being part of the long term are not the PhDs. They're going to be the people with bachelor's degrees, in some cases master's degrees, and oftentimes people who have experienced this as part of their education in a broad liberal arts framework. And I think what goes, and I think this is the power of Ramiro's minor program, is ability to engage people in the thinking and in somehow actionability as part of their education that doesn't require, that we're not asking the PhDs to solve the problem. If the PhDs are going to solve the problem, we got a big problem, because it's never going to
There are
happen.
too few of them. Yeah. No, Joe, I mean,
there's too few, and they're too aloof. I mean, we breed them to be aloof. That's the goal.
I mean, it's interesting what you say, because does diversity, equity, inclusion mean that the institution, the academic institution, commits to recruiting from these, as Donna said, these underserved communities? Is that the bargain, whether it says it overtly or not, that it makes? that the Pueblos, for instance, get 5 students into UNM master's program just because they bring that way of thinking about. I don't know. I mean, but I think the 4 points that you raised, Joe, put that at issue. Bring that question to the table of how do you manage. I mean, if the 4 points are a management coda for an engineering school, then how do you manage for inclusion when you're not bringing the people who you're studying into the process of solving the problems that they're elaborating on?
Well, diversity on entry is a big issue, and that's something that's been struggled with, not just in engineering but in academia for a long time. And if there was an easy answer, I would have, done something about it. There isn't. That's not to say that we don't work on it. We have to work on it. But the other idea is if diversity and inclusion is the idea that we only educate elites. By elites, I mean medical doctors, lawyers, PhDs in engineering. That's not very inclusive. And the idea that the educational programs may have that as part of what they do, but that the objective of the education is much, much more inclusive, not just by entry, but in terms of access and exposure and all those things. To me, is really, really important. And so there's facets of this issue.
Yeah, I think the YouTube channel for Drexel's discoveries
I mean,
would be really powerful, right? And you would create awareness of what goes on in that campus, right?
I was actually, Bernard and I are talking about he's on sabbatical next term, and we'd like to set up a couple podcasts. What's peace engineering and why, and that kind of stuff. And who knows how many people will listen to it? But podcasts kind of reach people in weird ways. But the other thing I wanted to point out, or something that I think is a tool that we can use when we're talking about peace engineering, especially in this meeting coming up on the 28th. Yes, this is a new idea. It is. However, there's all sorts of things that have happened before that serve as really good models for what we're trying to accomplish. There are new engineering programs that have demonstrated great capabilities in improving diversity in engineering. Environmental and biomedical, we know how they were established. We don't have to reinvent that wheel. We understand the idea of incremental compounding change through the history of safety engineering. We have existence proofs on these kinds of things. There's all sorts of ways where we can deflect the issues of, well, this seems awfully new, and say, well, there is new, but we know exactly how to do these things. And I think that disarms people as well. And I think if we are effective at disarming people on the idea, then all of a sudden I think then we sort of assimilate them.
It's funny. It's funny because when I hear you say that, Joe, sir, Tesla and SpaceX are examples of something new, but they're both examples of 2 things. Engineering at an incredible rate of speed, and a new business model. In both cases, without a business model, Elon could not have succeeded to the extent that he has. And this is why I think it's just so important what you've said is, and what the group has been saying, let's do a convergence of capabilities. I don't know. I can barely find my way to convert centigrade and Fahrenheit, but I do know how to read a stock table and the pro forma for business. It would be nice to get. The university was supposed to be a place where you got this admixture of talents with complex problems in front of them. Let's restore that, because peace engineering actually does reestablish the fundamental principles of a university. That's why it's not new, Joe. That's
Mhm. Yeah.
I think this is, there's folks at Sandia that we work with, and for them, for some of them, peace engineering is not new. They've been working on peace engineering for many, many, many years. So it was an interesting conversation and exchange that we had with some of these people in the labs, and they are really into peace engineering. They see this change, and when they see, if they haven't seen the NAE strategic goals, they're going to get surprised. It'll be an eye opener, because this is, it just put converged in those 4 bullets. And guys, I want to thank you. I think we made a lot of progress, and it was a good group. And Anik, if you want people to confuse your studies, there's 3 of us. We can do a good job in confusing you, and Donna will work with you and sift all the noise that we will introduce. But I wanna thank you guys. Last thoughts before
Here's
we,
my go ahead, Anik.
One thing that was mentioned a bit earlier was the accessibility to this education, including these diverse perspectives. So something that I've just like a really basic example here is maybe how, we do have these principles of what ethical engineering looks like, and I would say more generally ethical education. But it's not, the way it's spoken about is very different about the way that it is practiced. And this is not meant to be a very up here kind of thinking. It's really, it comes to the point of, so in the Netherlands, we have a housing crisis. So students are dropping out of uni because they can't get a room. Where we're seeing that TAs are not being proactive in making audio available to students who are joining online, even though they're paying for a hybrid education. So it's although we talk about it at this very up here level, it's these really small logistical problems that create these barriers. And like Donna said in the chat, tuition is definitely also a barrier, but it's also these really small details that just happen within the classroom in the way that, on the receiving end of that education, how it impacts us. So if we get a cold right now, or at least if I as a student get a cold, I can't go to class and I can't hear the professor talking.
Right.
They don't know how to use the technology necessary. So it's those really small logistical problems.
Yeah, that's one of the things that some studies have shown time and time again is that we think about some of the big barriers, and tuition is a big barrier. That's a big one. But you get rid of that and you find out there's still little barriers, and those are still enough to cause a problem. And so it is really a systems kind of an approach to look at this, to say that it's not just getting rid of the biggest barrier, it's getting rid of barriers, plural. And that's where universities have really, really struggled, is to even little things seemingly small are the difference between yes or no.
Going back to what you said, Joe, this agile scrum, it's not new, but people need to jump into it. I mean, agile engineering has been forever until, what is it, Steve Blank discovered agile engineering, and he used agile in his entrepreneurial book, and then he became famous. But this came from engineering. And in the old days, these were these skunk works, right?
Yep.
So we need to go back and really re-engineer, go back to the skunk works and solve these issues. Like you said, there's little barriers and the big barriers all need to be re-engineered.
Right. So if you really go back in history, skunk works is a great example. Software engineering today is the more modern example of it.
Right.
But whenever the objective of something to be created was truly different in technology, it's been developed through something equivalent to a Scrum. Maybe not as prescribed as the current Scrum, the way that they sell Scrum, but it was not the idea of how do we build another McDonald's? Well, we've done a few of those. We can do it again. It's when you're saying, how do we build the first of a kind? So people who do prototype engineering understand the Scrum very, very well. And oftentimes if we even just say that, I mean, because engineers are not afraid of the word prototype. You say, if you're ready to do prototype engineering, then you should appreciate the process of a Scrum. But to be honest with you, when we teach, I'm teaching senior design this year. It is very much, the ABET process is very much waterfall. It's
I
do
know.
this, then do
Yeah.
that, and then do this, and then you're done.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people just don't get the opportunity to participate in something like a Scrum.
Yeah.
So I think if nothing else, it deflects people from saying, well, how do you do it? And we say, well, that's easy. We choose a Scrum. Why don't you go read about that? Can we talk about something new? And at least we got to pass those people.
Well, and I think what's great about it, Joe, is we've used the metaphor of Independence Day, the movie, and that there's an urgency of all hands on deck globally. And the firepower, if you will, of the engineering schools to address things quickly. Well, it reminds me very much of the experience after 9/11 at the command center, where just everybody was bringing their A game to the issues of the day, and they weren't waiting for permission, and they were defying a bit of convention. And notwithstanding that New York City government is probably affectionately called Moscow on the Hudson for a good reason, it is glacier. It doesn't move that quickly. It was able to move that quickly because of the urgencies in front of it, and because everybody recognized that no matter who was at the command center, you had a badge and you were able to bring your A game. In fact, you were required to bring your A game. So I think not only are you talking about re-engineering the way the engineering school approaches the education, but I think you're re-engineering the culture of the engineering school to react with some expediency to the opportunities that are right in front of us, because if we don't, no one's getting scholarships, because those people aren't necessarily going to be findable.
So guys, I'm gonna share this dashboard that developed with a couple of students
Cool.
to close our recording. So that's the dashboard. Well, I asked them to come up with dashboards, and I like this one because they capture the image of the planet kind of frowning. So I want to thank you guys. It was an awesome session. Thank you so much. And I guess we'll meet next Friday.